El Mencho, from the mountains to the myth. Somewhere in the mountains of western Mexico, in a place so remote that the nearest paved road was a full day's walk away, a child was born into poverty. He would grow up to become one of the most wanted men on the planet, a man with a $10 million bounty on his head, a man whose criminal empire would stretch across 5 continents, a man whose organization would be responsible for flooding American streets with fentanyl and methamphetamine on a scale never before seen in history. His name is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. The world knows him as El Mencho. This is his story. Part 1. The Mountains. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was born on July 17, 1966, in the state of Michoacán, Mexico. He was one of many children in a poor farming family, scratching a living from the land in the rugged western highlands of the country. The states of Michoacán and Jalisco, which share a border through these mountains, have for generations been the birthplace of Mexico's most powerful criminal organizations. The terrain, remote, beautiful, and almost impossible to police, has always provided cover for those who needed to disappear. And poverty has always provided a steady supply of young men willing to do whatever it takes to escape it. Young Nemesio grew up watching. He watched which men had money. He watched which men had power. He watched which men were feared and which men were respected. And in the world he grew up in, those men were almost always the same person. He worked the land as a teenager, but he was restless, ambitious in a place where ambition had nowhere legal to go. And so, like so many young men from these mountains before him and after him, he made the decision that would change everything. He crossed the border into the United States. Part 2. California. In the late 1980s, Nemesio made his way to California. He settled in the Bay Area and Central Valley, where large communities of Mexican immigrants had built new lives far from home. He worked, he observed, and he began to understand something that would define the rest of his life. The demand for drugs in America was essentially unlimited, and young men who knew the right people, men who could make the right connections, were becoming extraordinarily wealthy. Nemesio began making those connections. United States law enforcement records show that he was arrested in California in the early 1990s on drug-related charges. He was convicted. He was deported back to Mexico. For most men, that is where the story ends. A door slammed shut, a humiliation, a return to the farm. For Nemesio Oseguera, deportation was not an ending. It was an education. He returned to Mexico with contacts, with knowledge of the American market, and with a reputation in the criminal world for being reliable, for being quiet, for getting the job done without creating problems. These are the qualities that get a man promoted in a cartel. Part 3. Rising through the ranks. Back in Mexico, Nemesio aligned himself with the Milenio Cartel, a Jalisco-based organization with connections to the powerful Sinaloa Federation. He rose steadily, not through reckless violence, but through discipline and operational skill. He moved product, he managed logistics, he solved problems. But more importantly, he studied. He studied the men around him. He watched powerful figures fall because they trusted the wrong people. He watched empires collapse because their leaders got too visible, too arrogant, too comfortable. He watched El Chapo, the most famous drug lord in history, become a global celebrity, and he watched that celebrity eventually lead to a prison cell. He watched the Arellano Felix brothers wage open war on every front until they were picked off one by one. He watched the Beltran Leyva family self-destruct through internal betrayal. Every one of them, at some point, forgot the first rule of survival. They made themselves a target. Nemesio Oseguera resolved never to make that mistake, and that single decision, to remain invisible, to remain disciplined, to never let ego override strategy, would set him apart from every cartel leader who came before him. Part 4. The birth of CJMG. The year 2010 was a turning point for organized crime in Mexico.
The Milenio cartel had fractured. Rival factions were tearing each other apart over territory in Jalisco and Michoacán. The country was descending into levels of cartel warfare that were overwhelming the government's ability to respond. Out of this chaos, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, now going by the name El Mencho, emerged as a leader. He co-founded the organization that the world would come to know as the Cartel Jalisco Nuevo Generación, in English, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known simply as CJNG. The name itself was a statement, new generation, not the slow, cautious approach of the old cartels. CJNG would be modern, aggressive, ruthlessly efficient, and willing to use violence on a scale that shocked even hardened observers of Mexico's drug war. In its early years, the cartel consolidated control of Jalisco quickly and brutally. Rivals were eliminated, warnings were left for anyone who considered resistance. But El Mencho understood something the purely violent organizations never grasped. Terror alone does not build an empire. Loyalty does. He paid his soldiers well. He supported the families of those who died serving the organization. He cultivated, in some communities, the image of a protector, a man who took care of his own. Those who crossed him experienced a very different man. Part 5. War with the Government. April 2015. A convoy of Mexican federal police and military forces moves through the mountains of Jalisco. Their mission is to locate and capture El Mencho. They never come close. CJNG fighters ambush the convoy with military-grade weapons, assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenades. 15 federal police officers are killed. A military helicopter is shot from the sky. The entire nation watches in disbelief. No cartel had attacked the Mexican state with this level of military precision since the Zetas, a group formed by former Special Forces soldiers who had defected to the criminal world. The Mexican government declared all-out war on CJNG. Thousands of soldiers flooded into Jalisco. Roadblocks sealed the state's highways. El Mencho vanished. He would not be found. He would not be captured. And the message he sent to every criminal organization in Mexico and to the Mexican government itself was received clearly. We are not afraid of you. Part 6. The Global Empire. While governments searched for him, El Mencho was building something unprecedented. CJNG grew within less than a decade from a regional Mexican cartel into what the United States Drug Enforcement Administration officially described as one of the most powerful and most dangerous criminal organizations anywhere on Earth. The cartel established trafficking routes moving methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl into the United States through border crossings, tunnels, and shipments concealed inside legitimate goods. They built distribution networks in dozens of American cities, Chicago, Columbus, Philadelphia, Phoenix, and hundreds of smaller towns across the country. Internationally, CJNG product was seized by law enforcement in Europe, Australia, Asia, and Africa. The organization born in the mountains of Jalisco had gone global. A single kilogram of fentanyl, a package the size of a brick, could produce hundreds of thousands of potentially lethal doses. In community after community across America, families were burying children who had taken a pill they believed was a painkiller, not knowing it had been pressed in a cartel-linked laboratory and smuggled across the border in shipments too small to detect.
Part 7. Blood and Family. El Mencho ran CJNG as a family business in the most literal sense. His wife, known as La Jefa, played an active role in the organization's finances, according to United States federal indictments. Her brothers formed their own affiliated trafficking network operating alongside CJNG. His son, known as El Menchito, was groomed from a young age to eventually take over the organization. He was arrested in Mexico in 2015, transferred to United States custody, and convicted in a federal court in 2023 on drug trafficking and weapons charges. He now faces decades in an American prison. A son paying for the sins of a father who was never caught. For El Mencho, family was not just a personal matter, it was a security strategy. In a world where anyone could be a government informant, blood was the only thing he truly trusted. Part 8. The Ghost. Investigators who spent years hunting El Mencho kept returning to the same word to describe him: a ghost. Unlike El Chapo, who enjoyed parties, communicated by phone, and famously invited a Hollywood actor to interview him while on the run, El Mencho operated with extreme and unwavering discipline. He rarely stayed in the same location more than a few nights. He used physical couriers rather than phones. He trusted almost no one outside a tiny inner circle. He understood something fundamental. Every celebration is a surveillance opportunity. Every phone call is a potential intercept. Every trusted friend is a potential informant. He had also, according to multiple credible reports, developed serious health problems, kidney disease requiring regular dialysis treatments. In the normal world, a man who needs dialysis several times a week is easy to locate. There are only so many clinics. There are only so many machines. El Mencho somehow managed to receive the treatment keeping him alive while remaining invisible to the most sophisticated law enforcement apparatus in the Western Hemisphere. Part 9. The Cost. To truly understand El Mencho's empire, you have to understand what it cost the ordinary people living in its shadow. In every state where CJNG fought for control, Jalisco, Michoacán, Guanajuato, Colima, Veracruz, communities were torn apart. Farmers were forced to pay extortion or lose everything. Business owners who refused were murdered. Police who resisted were assassinated. Those who could not be killed were threatened through their families, their children, their wives. Mexico's crisis of the disappeared, tens of thousands of people whose bodies have never been found, is in significant part a CJNG story. The cartel's practice of making enemies vanish entirely, of burying victims in mass graves scattered across the mountains, has left thousands of families in a permanent state of grief without answers and without closure. In Guadalajara, one of Mexico's most beautiful cities, mothers gathered in the central plaza holding photographs of their missing children. They wrote names on banners. They marched through the streets. They are still marching. Part 10. The Hunt. The United States government placed a $10 million bounty on the head of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the same figure once offered for Osama bin Laden, the same figure offered for El Chapo. For years, that bounty went uncollected. Mexican and American law enforcement pursued him through one of the most extensive manhunts in the history of North American law enforcement. Safe houses were raided, laboratories were destroyed, lieutenants were captured, extradited, and offered deals in exchange for their cooperation. Their testimony filled hundreds of pages of sealed federal indictments in courthouses across the United States. Still, El Mencho endured. By the early 2020s, reports painted a picture of a man in serious physical decline. The kidney disease was progressing. The years of living underground, constantly moving, never resting, trusting almost no one, had taken a visible toll. The question investigators were asking had quietly shifted. It was no longer simply, can we catch him? It had become, will he survive long enough to be caught? Part 11. What remains? As of the recording of this documentary, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes has not been confirmed dead or captured by any government authority. The $10 million reward remains active. CJNG continues to operate. And that is perhaps the most important thing to understand about a man like El Mencho. He is mortal. All men are mortal. But the conditions that created him, those are not so easily destroyed. Poverty in the mountains of western Mexico is not solved. The demand for drugs in the United States is not solved. The corruption inside Mexican institutions that allows criminal organizations to operate openly is not solved. El Mencho did not appear from nowhere. He was produced by specific conditions, and those conditions, left unchanged, will produce others, younger men standing on the same mountainside, watching the same landscape, making the same calculation. The farm or the cartel? The story of Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes did not begin with power, did not begin with violence, did not begin with drugs. It began in the mountains, with a boy and a decision. Many boys make that decision. Most of them die young and are forgotten, buried in unmarked ground in the same hills where they were born. One of them became El Mencho, and the world is still paying the price.